All right, welcome everyone. I think there's still a few folks joining, but I'm going to get us started. I'm Kristen Rolls. I'm with the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center. Thanks for joining us today for this regional water planning webinar. I will just note that this is intended to be an hour long. We plan to have you done by 1 o'clock. There is a chat function available, and if you can open that up and put your name and your affiliation in it, then everyone can see who else is here from the other councils around the state. Whoops. All right, this regional water planning webinar series is something that we started last spring. It's a chance to provide council members with learning opportunities to support you in your work as water planners. The purpose of them is to share information on topics of common interest to support you in your planning. And we are recording all the webinars so that they're available for future viewing by those that cannot attend. So this is being recorded right now. If you've got suggestions for future webinars, please share those with us. Shoot any of us an email, your council lead or to me, or put it in the chat. And we'll try to work that into a future webinar. We're in the process of planning some for the spring right now. We do have another webinar planned for December that I'll tell you about as we get to the end of the meeting, but you should have received some emails already about it. All right, before we get started with the speaker, just wanted to give you a little bit of the context for what we're going to talk about today. Stacy Berahzer, she's going to talk with us today about setting rates for water and wastewater. So I pulled up regional water plans and looked to see who had management practices about setting rates. And 4 of the plans have management practices that support the use of conservation-oriented rate structures for water: Upper Oconee, Middle Ocmulgee, Middle Chattahoochee, and Coosa, North Georgia. 3 regional water plans have a more general recommendation that says that water systems should use Tier 2 water conservation practices. That's referring to the Water Conservation Implementation Plan from 2010. That Tier 2, that set of practices, also includes water conservation-oriented rate structures. Those are Savannah, Upper Ogeechee, Coastal Georgia, and Altamaha. So Stacy works through her presentation today. I just wanted to encourage you to think about things that you might want to take back to your council to discuss as we look at the next plan update. And the 4 major themes that she's going to be hitting on are how rate structures encourage conservation, cost recovery, affordability, and business friendliness. So if there's something there that you'd like to have further discussion about, or something else that she hits upon today that we should try to make sure that we work into your council discussions, please let your council lead know, and we'll try to work that in. And with that, I'm going to turn to just introducing Stacy. So Stacy is with us this morning, and she is with IB Environmental. She's the CEO of IB Environmental, Stacy Isaac Berahzer. And Stacy, I hate to admit this, but your bio has just dropped off of my screen, and I'm going to let you tell us more about your background. But I've worked with Stacy for a long time, as she reminded me yesterday, and really looking forward to her comments. Thanks, Stacy.
Right, I'm gonna make sure my screen is sharing first. Let's see. Let's go here. All right. I assume you guys are seeing my screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, there's never a good webinar if there's not a little bit of drama. So yeah, I can do a quick background on myself, but also my colleague Liz here, Elizabeth Jurado, she has the same background on her camera as I do, and maybe she can drop a link to my bio online, but that's the last interesting stuff. Let's get into the materials here. So yeah, IB Environmental is a firm who's been around. We've been around for 7.5, 8 years, and we do a lot of work on this topic, like Kristen said, which is why we're very excited to be talking to y'all today. So interrupt if you have questions that are really burning, and then you put stuff in the chat, and we have several people who are helping us look at the chat, right? But basically, in terms of background, I worked at this group called the Environmental Finance Center at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. But from Georgia since 2005, right? So I've been here for a long time and know the landscape here of water, sewer, and stormwater utility pricing. So that's the perspective I'm bringing today. So we'll talk about the firm a little bit to give you a little bit more background on the work that we do. Then I'll give some background or introduction to rate setting. And we'll talk about the fundamentals of rate setting in Georgia specifically, right? And then we'll talk about trends that we've been seeing in Georgia over the last, 15 plus years. And then I'll give you some information if you want to stay connected and follow up with me on certain questions or whatever. So a little bit about our firm. Really, these are our 4 buckets, but we say water and energy affordability and equity is where we spend most of our time. I always joke, I would love to do more work in the Caribbean, but that's really the smallest of the 4 buckets, right? So we spend most of our time in water, energy, and affordability, but rate setting is a really important part of that. The rates are what may generate a situation of that's not affordable, correct? So that's why we spend a lot of time there. We also work with a group called the Georgia Water Funders Forum, and we have like webinars with them. We have a one-day workshop at least per year. So that's another way that you could learn more about funding. And the thing about funding is if you get a loan from one of these funders, you usually have to pay it back, right? There are very few grants around. And so your water rates, again, is what's going to help you repay those low interest loans that are from the state or the federal government. And then we do some work in stormwater and watershed management and a tiny bit of work in the Caribbean, mainly in Trinidad and Tobago and Puerto Rico. This is our team. We're kind of spread out all over. Liz, who's on the call today, she and I are based in the Atlanta metro area. Anna is in Chicago, Rita is in Rhode Island, and Ashok is in Texas. But you have the main team here. Liz and I handle most of this stuff. So today we're talking about rate setting, but with an emphasis on conservation-oriented rate setting, if you will. When you promote conservation in the rate setting process, something may take a hit. So we'll see that rate setting is part science, part art, but you're always trying to balance different factors that we'll talk about more. But I don't want to create mass chaos here, but just think about this. If you're focused on conservation, what may take a hit? And the answer really is affordability. But if you want to promote conservation, now I'm talking about conservation through prices, right? Through rate setting, not, giving low flow fixtures and all that kind of stuff through the rate structure. If you design a rate structure that will promote conservation, it's probably not going to help with affordability. And so to sort of balance and not feel too guilty about going around telling utilities they need to raise their water and sewer rates and their stormwater fees. Maybe that's why Liz and I focus so much on affordability. You need to raise your rates, but let's design a program to help the customers who genuinely won't be able to afford the rates when you have that rate increase probably, right? So we spend a lot of time on this equity and affordability stuff. So in terms of a background on rate setting, you're really trying to do magic with your water and sewer rates. It's a lot of factors that you have to consider and maybe objectives that you're trying to address or achieve, right? So when you set your rates, will it provide sufficient cost recovery? What is sufficient cost recovery, right? We started having a conversation before the webinar here with Ms. Beth. When you have a system that's over 100 years old, you have to put aside money, for instance, to replace, the infrastructure, right? Another thing is a consideration with setting rates is, do these rates send the right price signals to our customers based on our objectives? And that keyword objectives will come back to affordability. Okay, we can set the perfect rate structure for our needs, our infrastructure needs, our replacement needs, but will the customers that we have in our service area actually be able to pay those rates? It's important too, not only that they can pay them, but they can understand those rates. This is a question of equity too. Are we allocating the right cost to the right customers? So there are different groups of customers. Are you making your residential customers sort of subsidize commercial entities because maybe you're trying to promote economic development in your community, or vice versa, right? And then last but not least, are we following state law or, in your case, your regional plans policies that have been outlined? So lots to consider. It's not an easy practice, but this is just an example. To set the correct or a correct or an appropriate, I guess I should say, rate structure, you really need to understand your community, the makeup of your community. If you have a lot of large families, then that kind of stays to one type of rate structure. If they are pretty low income, it stays to, a different type of rate structure or different tweaks in the rate structure design. Seasonal communities, we have a few of those in Georgia where it's a beach community maybe, and so you have a different rate structure in the summer versus the rest of the year. So yeah, those are all considerations. So your rate structure should not just be copied from the neighbor next door, the next city or county over. You really need to design it based on your community's needs. If you have big capital expenses coming up, then you need to check on that and consider that in your rates as well. You've got to repay debt from, groups like GFA, the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, if you have state revolving fund loans from them, for instance. So yeah, lots to consider. So what we recommend is ranking, actually sitting down as a decision-making body and going through the exercise of physically writing down the objectives for your rate setting. And so it's not always a fun process, because if you have to pick number one out of these, that can be kind of tough. And I was telling Kristen before, maintaining affordability is a lofty goal, but when people are forced to do this, it normally ends up at number 4, right? These are tough choices. So if you're trying to encourage full cost recovery, you need to be recouping what your utility is spending now and will be spending in the future. So your rates, this leads to a higher rate structure, right? Encouraging conservation fits in with this. If you charge more from a price perspective, if you charge more, then we'll assume that customers would use a little bit less. So charging more for full cost recovery sort of helps with conservation. But that doesn't help maybe with maintaining affordability, or it doesn't encourage always businesses to come and locate in your community if the rates are higher. So it's definitely a balancing process, but you have to really kind of go through this exercise of ranking is what we recommend, right? So I'm not going to spend, what I understand is you guys may be not the ones actually setting the rates. You're going to take this information back to the finance director or whatever at the utility. So I'm going to keep it a little bit high level, yet you have these slides if you want to pass it on to that person for them to have some more detail. But these are all important elements when you're designing a rate structure. The customer classes, the distinction there. So for a smaller rural community, maybe it's simple. Maybe it's more simple, I should say. So it's residential customers versus commercial/industrial, right? So maybe you just have 2 classes. When you get into communities that are larger and more urban, then we have like multifamily, and we have commercial, we have obviously residential, then we might have industrial, so it gets a little bit more complicated. But I would recommend for smaller rural communities that have less staff, keep it simple unless there's a good reason to add some complication. Billing period, though, that's easy. Your billing period should not be less than 1 month. If it is, then maybe work towards changing that. Billing software is expensive and it may not be a quick change, but in your next billing software, try to make sure it's at least monthly billing. We'll talk about base charge versus consumption allowance. That ratio between those 2 parts of a bill is very important when it comes to things like affordability, but also revenue stability on the other side, right? And then we know some of the plans are calling for increasing block rates. So the number of blocks, the size of the blocks, the rate differentials are super important. We'll see if you have blocks, and I think everybody here can intuitively understand what I mean by a block structure or tiered structure. If the difference between block 1 and block 2 is 5 cents, then that rate differential is not significant, and why bother, So, and then temporal adjustments is what we talked about, seasonal rates, maybe if you're a beach community or a mountain community or something. And frequency of rates really should always be that you look at your rate structure once a year. Maybe you don't change it every year, maybe you change it every other year or so, but you should look at it at least once a year is best practice. So that's a little overview. Let's have some fun. Now, if you are brave and you want to put yourself off mute and answer, fine, but play along with me and think about some of this. So here we have, is it fact or is it fiction, right? The first one, high rates are bad. Is that fact or is that fiction? What do we think?
Fiction.
Fiction. Okay, that is correct. Let's see this way. So that is a myth, right? Higher rates do not necessarily reflect poor or inefficient management. Some utilities are just like they're behind on their infrastructure replacement and they need to catch up, for instance. So high rates are not a bad thing, even though I'll tell you, I have a couple examples of web pages across the state that say, once again, we are one of the lowest, rates in the state, and we're so proud of that. Maybe it's not a source of pride. It shouldn't be a source of pride. All right. The next one, comparing rates is simple.
Not really.
That's no, not really. It's also a myth because rates don't tell the entire story. The rates don't tell the income of the folks living there. So you may have two rate structures that are exactly the same in different parts of the state, but the income of the population is different. And so one community, you'll have a lot of non-payment because they just don't have the money to pay it. And there are all kinds of different factors that go into this. I think I've given myself away. You guys are seeing the pattern here. Pricing is simple, of course not, right? It is quite the balancing act. And there are different rate structure options to consider. And then last but not least, this one is a little bit more complicated. Promoting conservation requires increasing block rates. Is that true or false? A lot of folks and even experts will say that is true, but I will be a little bit inflammatory there and say that it's not necessarily true. So different types of rate structures can be employed to encourage conservation. So remember I said if there was a 5 cents difference between blocks and an increasing block rate, then maybe that's not very effective. So let's picture a rate structure where each 1,000 gallons cost $3. And then the next 1,000 gallons also cost $3. That's called the uniform rate structure. Well, that's pretty good. But what if we had an increasing block structure and we were charging $1 per 1,000 gallons, right? And then we went after the next tier to $1.05. See this statement I wanted to make sure and have for you. A good, robust, well-priced uniform rate structure can be more effective than a low or poorly priced increasing block rate, right? So this will all make a little bit more sense as we run through here. So now we're going to talk specifically about rate setting fundamentals and rates in the state of Georgia. There was a university that used to do this before. So you would see a lot of blues on these slides. And now the University of Georgia Carl Vinson Institute has taken over the annual rate survey and dashboard. And so there are lots of resources if you're trying to figure out how to use this new dashboard. It has a lot of good information. So you'll see on some of these slides, as if the red wasn't a giveaway, right? And the logo down here, slide provided by UGA's Carl Vinson Institute of Government. So these slides came directly from them. It is a new dashboard and it has a lot of good information on it. They are looking at over 500 water utilities in the state of Georgia. So it's a good amount of work. I wanted to highlight this one where it's broken the utilities down by their water planning region. So I figured that's a great feature of this dashboard. You can look and compare yourself to water and sewer utilities within your planning region. And so you see the regions here. Lots more could be said here about the types of utilities. Most of Georgia's utilities are municipal utilities and that they're city or, and then there's some county ones, of course. So yeah, with rates and rate structures, utilities have a lot of choices, like we said. There's almost always, though, a combination of two pieces to the bill. There's the base charge and a variable charge on top of that. But how you mix and match that base charge and that variable charge can differ a lot, right? So from a 2022 rate survey in Georgia, now the good thing for Georgians is this rate survey has been happening since around 2007 or 2008. So there's a lot of data over the years, and so we can see some trends. But back in 2022, this is what the mixture looked like. A base charge doesn't vary from one billing period to the next. It doesn't matter how much water you use or wastewater. It's fixed, a fixed charge. And sometimes with that fixed base charge, you get a couple thousand gallons of water for free. And that's what I call a consumption allowance, right? This term here. So Some utilities charge in a way where with that base charge, that fixed fee that you pay no matter if you're even in town or not as a residential customer, you get 0 gallons of water. And with other utilities, you get about 2,000 gallons of water. That's kind of the median amount that you get with a consumption allowance in Georgia. What do the rate structures look like? So you won't spend too much time on this, but this is showing, I think for 2024, what that base charge amount is like. It's the median base charge in the state has been about $15, right? So let's just pretend that's your base charge for your community. It means every month, each of your residential customers will pay you $15 plus the volumetric amount, right? And this is the idea of the allowance. A lot of utilities, like I said, do give 2,000 gallons, quote unquote, for free with that base charge. Yeah, this is a little bit more detail on the block rate structures. So we are going to focus on these top 3 ones: uniform, increasing, and decreasing. The others are for rate setting 102 or 202, right? It's a little bit more complicated, but really they are just permutations and combinations of the first 3. So let's look at that. Uniform rate structure, increasing block, and decreasing block. So this is what this chart here is showing: uniform. So the rate for each 1,000 gallons, that's what this means here. Most utilities in Georgia charge on per 1,000 gallons basis. Some charge by cubic feet, but we'll just keep 1,000 gallons as our example here to keep things consistent. So with the uniform rate structure, each 1,000 gallons costs exactly the same, right? With an increasing block structure, as the name suggests, in this case, the first like 5,000 gallons cost $2 per 1,000 gallons. But then when you start using more water, like, around 10,000, it costs more. And then when you start using a lot of water, and keep in mind that the typical household in Georgia uses about 5,000 gallons per month. So a household that's using 15 to 20, they are using a little bit extra water, if you will, than a typical household. And so that's partly the conservation pricing, built in there, that they want them to pay more for those higher volumes of water that hopefully will discourage them from using that much water and kind of encourage them to conserve. Decreasing block rate structure, if you understand increasing, then decreasing is the opposite. A very uncommon rate structure. There are only a couple of those in the state. They're a dying breed, and probably for good reason. There are a couple, instances where they make sense a little bit, but not a very common one. So really uniform and increasing is where we see most of the rate structures. So what is the most common volumetric rate structure in Georgia? I just told you guys, right? The increasing. The majority of residential water rate structures in the state, 52%, and then wastewater, 59%, according to this 2022 report, are increasing block rate. And there's good reason for that, right? Some of your councils suggest that if you're in the Metro District, then that's a requirement for all the folks in the Atlanta Regional Commission area. So just digging a little bit more into the 2022 results, and then UGA stuff. This is kind of a visual for you too. The 2022 stuff was before UGA took over the rate survey. So then from 2024, you're going to see red on the slides, but that's UGA handled those. But this is just showing water versus wastewater. The median monthly bill, remember I said 5,000 is a pretty common volume. So we just kind of use that for all of these analyses usually. From 2020 to 2022, this is what, the prices look like. And we're using the term inside bill, which will come to explain that a little bit later on. But the median was about $31 a month for water. Wastewater or sewer is usually a little bit higher, so $34.30 median, right? And then on the commercial side, it's higher usually, but we will not spend too much time. We're looking at commercial here at 50,000 gallons, right? But we're really focused more on residential for this presentation. Inside rates.
Stacy, can I just interrupt for a second? There was a quick question in the chat of clarification. That 5,000 gallons for a typical household, do you know the size of that?
That's a good question. It's not really multifamily household, for instance. I don't think we have I don't know of a good average residential household size for the state of Georgia, but we can look that up and see there's something. It's just so varied. If we think of the Metro Atlanta area, for instance, I'll tell you, let's talk about that 5,000 a little bit. So I had the utility director of Forsyth County would be like, it's 5,000. It's not like we have 6,000 to 7,000 is what you should do if you're doing an analysis for me, Stacy, because it's a different wealth level. The houses are bigger, the yards are even bigger. And then when we work with Clayton County Water Authority, for instance, in the south part of the metro area, they're like, let's use 4,000. Let's use 4,500 gallons, right? Because they have a smaller housing stock. So it's hard to come up with an average. But yeah, so I don't have the square footage for you, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. But good question though, and something that Liz is probably helping me take note of that we can. The average would probably mean little for the whole state, but it's probably good to know what it is, right? Since everything else here is averages for the state. But inside versus outside rates, again, this is probably rate structure 201, but just know that an inside rate is not inside your house and an outside rate is not your irrigation, meter outside your house. That's not what this means. It means that most cities or counties have the rate structure for inside their city or county limits, but most of them serve at least a few customers outside their city or county limits, so outside their jurisdictional boundary. And often there is a higher rate structure for the outside customers, the customers who live outside the jurisdictional boundary. So you have some stats here from 2022 about that. Irrigation rates, though, that's when you have a water meter outside your house that's specifically for watering your garden or lawn or whatever. It's not as important or big of a deal in Georgia as it is in some states like North Carolina, mainly because of state law. But yeah, so this slide is just kind of for your background if you want to look at this after. For water conservation purposes, though, you want that irrigation rate structure to be pretty high. If you're trying to encourage water conservation, you want it to be more than what people are paying for the rates inside their house, for instance, and probably more than water and sewer rates combined, even though we know it's not going into the sewer because it's, in the yards, right? So more on that later if you guys have questions. But for now, I'll move on. So what are we seeing over all of these years in Georgia rate setting? Are there patterns? Are there trends that we're seeing? So again, now this is UGA stuff, so it's a little bit more recent, 2024, I think. There might have been a little gap as the rate survey project was being transferred from UNC Chapel Hill to UGA. But generally, we don't have large gaps in this data set, right? So what are utilities charging? So we're seeing for water across the state, again, for 5,000 gallons, they're charging about $32.11 per month, which works out to about $385 for the year. Sewer, it costs a lot more, generally speaking, to manage sewer and to treat sewer. So these sewer rates usually will be higher. In fact, I'm surprised that they're not, a lot higher. In some ways, water in some communities is subsidizing sewer. Usually the sewer rate, there's not a sewer meter, right? You have a water meter that kind of measures the water coming into your house from the utility. And then the assumption is all of the water in your house that you use goes into the sewer system. So there's not a sewer meter. But usually it's like, the sewer rate structure is going to be 1.5 times the water or something like that. But this, because it's looking at over 500 water utility rate structures, we do a lot of mean, median, mode kind of thing. And 50th percentiles and that kind of stuff. But 50% of monthly water bills typically in Georgia in 2024-ish fall between like $23 and $38, right? So there is a variation there. And then sewer is between $26 and $46.
Stacy, there's a question. Can we take that now? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Sharp.
My question is there a difference or should there be a difference from authority rates and private enterprise rates?
Okay, that is a good question. So authority rates versus private enterprise rates. Let's see if I'm understanding what you mean by authority rates. So I hate to go back to one of these slides, but the vast majority of this 500, now, there are like 2,000 publicly owned, no, there are 2,000-ish public water systems in Georgia. A public water system serves more than 25 in population. It's a pretty low bar to be a public water system. Some of them are owned privately. They're owned by maybe a trailer park management company or a school in a rural area. Maybe they run their own water system, right? But the 500 plus, like 530 of them, tend to be city, county, or authority run water and sewer utilities. So city and county, that's pretty, I think, intuitive. But then some water utilities and wastewater utilities have been designated by the state of Georgia as sort of a regional entity, and they're called authorities. If you're talking about that specific sort of governmental structure of an authority, they tend to have maybe slightly higher water and sewer rates, partly because they're focused on water. And so they tend to have really good financial policies and that kind of thing. And so their rate structures keep up with their need, their infrastructure need. And so their rates may be a little bit higher than some of the city or county owned ones. And we have relatively few privately owned water utilities in Georgia. Most of them are publicly owned. And their prices, it's a little bit more tricky there because there's no entity in the state of Georgia that governs water rate structure. So maybe I'm not answering your question. When you say authority, do you mean the handful like Clayton County Water Authority that's sort of regional? It serves both the county and some cities within it.
It's public. The
Sorry?
authority would be a public. I can give you an example if you would like.
Sure.
In Putnam County, Georgia, the Eatonton-Putnam Water and Sewer Authority,
Mhm.
a bill would be for water and sewer about $65 a month. In the northern part of our county, we have Piedmont Water, and I live in the northern part. And my average bill, or the bill for roughly 5,000 gallons water and sewer, would be $160 a month.
Mm.
So it's more than double in Putnam
Mhm.
County. And of course, it's not controlled, and the public is more controlled, of course. So is that standard? Is that pretty much the same across the state?
We have relatively few compared to other states in the Southeast. Georgia doesn't have as many private water utilities, for better or for worse. So the thing is, a lot of states, the Public Service Commission or the Public Utilities Commission, help govern the financial part of water and sewer utilities. In other words, they help govern the rate structure and the prices. Georgia is like one of 7 states where the PSC does not regulate water at all. They don't regulate water even for private water utilities. So, that leaves us in a pretty unique position because there's some states where the Public Service Commission will regulate only the privately owned ones, right? But it kind of, the difference is, if you don't like what the government-owned utility is charging, then maybe it will affect your voting. But with the private entity, how do you have any influence on the rates that they set? And so maybe that's what's explaining the leeway to be more expensive. But we do see that some of the private utilities charging more, twice as much. Maybe they're doing a better job of keeping up with their infrastructure, and the water authority that's nearby needs to catch up with their rate setting and therefore their infrastructure. So it's kind of hard to say, but yeah, Georgia's in a pretty unique position when it comes to governing of water and sewer rates.
Thank you.
Stacy, I see another hand up, and I just wanted to, Sean early with EPD, and so if we could take that quickly, and then maybe we'll let Stacy finish out, and then hold the questions till the end.
Yeah,
Sean?
sorry, I was just going to make the comment that there's the majority of water systems in the state are privately owned. There's 1,900 small privately owned water systems, and the biggest problem with funding is they're not eligible to take money from GFA. So
Mhm.
for them to get loans and address things in their water systems, they have to go get a private loan, which is going to have a higher interest rate. And the majority of private systems do charge more than public water systems
It's a
because of
good
that
point. They
upkeep.
don't, yeah, thanks, Sean. They don't have access to that low interest financing source. So they have to face the private market. And so that can explain a lot of that too. And those are some of the same numbers, right? If you look at what EPA considers to be a public water system, there are a couple thousand in the state. This survey is focused on the largest ones. A lot of those smaller ones that Sean's referring to, they probably charge a flat fee per month. Some of them don't even have a meter, for instance. But yeah, it is difficult for private water systems. They have fewer resources in terms of financing. So that's a good point. And I will make an offer here. If there, we can use the UGA's comparison tool here to drill down more on your Putnam example. Because of course, Georgia's a big state and we have a lot of utilities. So if that's something that will be helpful, I'm happy to engage with that afterwards. So how have rates been changing though? The average residential bill increase between 23 and 24. This is what we're seeing. So probably no surprise, rates and bills are not going down, right? They're going up. But in some utilities, they're going up faster than others. So it's really important, like I told you, one of the best practices or the elements of rate structure design is when last will the bills change. They should be looked at every year. And so that's always a part of this survey. If you're trying to nudge your utility to look at a rate increase, or you're trying to assist them in getting a rate increase improved, or at least a rate analysis done, these are usually good stats to use. Now, do prices reflect the true cost of service? And so that kind of goes back to the Putnam question. If there are some utilities that just charge too little and they're proud of that and they don't care if they need to raise more revenue, they're just going to charge, lower than everybody else, right? And so that's one way to sort of misuse this rates dashboard that you're going to see, is to just see what everybody else is charging and be under that, but maybe your system needs more. And so the operating ratio, especially with considering depreciation, is a very important metric for a water utility. And I will say, over the work that I've done over 15 years in the state, a lot of times the operating ratio is less than 1, which means that the utility is spending more than they are bringing in terms of revenue. That's red. That's not a good situation to be in, and it's not financially sustainable, right? So prices should reflect the true cost of service. And if you find that your utility is not there, then the recommendation is small rate increases going forward. As try not to have sticker shock. Maybe double digits would raise a lot of eyebrows, but you have to get to a place where you are covering the costs and the future costs to replace your infrastructure. So that's a little bit more on, this is what the operating ratio looks like on the UGA dashboard. You don't want it to be less than 1. That means you're in the red. And you probably don't want it to be like, over 2, right? So unless there's a good reason. So generally around 1.2 is a good metric benchmark for operating ratios. But if your utility, to Sean's point, if you're a private utility, for instance, privately owned, and you can't get a loan from GFA, you can't get a loan from USDA Rural Development or whatever, and you have to face the private market, maybe you start raising your rates now and sort of banking that money in a reserve or a capital fund, then maybe the operating ratio will be higher than 1.2. And so there you have to look at the specific circumstances, right? To see how that operating ratio can be interpreted. How affordable are residential bills in Georgia? So it's really common to look at percentage median household income. So the bill, let's say the bill is $95 for water and sewer, compared to the income of that area, what's that ratio, right? And so that's a really common way. A note you'll see, MHI is usually the way to abbreviate percentage, median household income, sorry, but on the new dashboard, you'll see, I think they're using MHHI, so 2 H's. at least for now. So are the rates affordable? So median is the most common way, and that's what the dashboard shows. But we also find, and the water industry has sort of evolved to say 20th percentile is a really important way to measure affordability, because median by definition sort of glosses over this half of your population, right? And it's the more important half, it's the more relevant half when it comes to affordability, because these are the lowest income folks in your community. Maybe we don't care what somebody that's making $300,000 in our community is paying for water, because that's going to be affordable. He or she can afford the water bills, but it's down here that we're concerned, how much of a percentage of this person's income are they spending on water? So this is a model that IB Environmental has developed. It's called POPs, or Pockets of Poverty. And here we're looking at, this is Cherokee County, so, familiar part of Georgia, hopefully, the North Metro Atlanta area. And this is what the water burden looks like at the median household income, so MHI. So that 50th percentile, right? This one right here, that's what this first map is showing. If you look at the average water bill for 5,000 gallons of water per month, and you look at these different census tracts that make up this particular city's service area, it looks uniform. It looks like everybody can afford it at the median household income, right? But when we start looking at drilling down to the 20th percentile, then we see there is some variation. It clearly shows that the folks living, so this is the water utility boundary, actually, right? This kind of weird shape. Within that utility service area, this part of it, so almost half of it, is where folks may not be able to pay higher bills. There might be high levels of non-payment right now, high levels of water shut off, right? So this is probably where you want to focus. But we see that this is probably the area that you're not seeing any stress indicators right now. So this one is at the 20th percentile. Now, I will say these two maps are sometimes used for, forget median and 20th for a moment. Sometimes this is what it looks like before the rate increase, and this is what it looks like after the proposed rate increase. So some utilities want to see, okay, we're going to pull the trigger, we're going to bite the bullet. We know all these violent analogies, but expressions, but we're going to go ahead and do this rate increase, but we want to know where it's going to have the most impact, like who is really going to be affected. And so these maps could be before and after rate increase, but the truth is, in this case, they are median household income and 20th percentile. So what we would do in this case is the utility may be able to approve a rate increase, even though it's going to negatively affect the population, but they may be able to get that increase passed anyway, because they say, well, we know where the hot spots are, or the pockets of poverty, and we will find a way to address like this area in particular, whether it's putting in, when these folks call in because they can't pay the higher rates, you say, call the Salvation Army, the water utility has sent some money over there and they'll help you with your water bill. Or whether the utility says, we are going to develop our own what's called a customer assistance program at the utility for our lowest income customers, but we're going to go ahead and raise these rates where they need to be. That's kind of, there's only so much you can do in terms of affordability through the rate structure. And when you're trying to do things like conservation, inevitably there's going to be some subset of your population that genuinely can't afford the rates. So you have to set eligibility criteria and stuff too if you do develop a customer assistance program, because not everybody gets the help, right? They have to be able to prove that they are low income or they have some sort of disadvantage. And then they might get a 30% discount on their bill, etc. So yeah, with that, I'm going to just say this is how you can get connected. So we blog on some of these things, maybe just like on average once a month. So we have a blog here that Liz is probably going to drop in the chat if you want to sign up for that, or you don't have to sign up. You can just go whenever you feel like it and check out what we've posted. But we do work on water and energy as well. In fact, one of the most interesting maps is when you combine the water burden and the energy burden for a community, right? Because people need electricity and gas as well. And you combine those and you do a map like this, then it's really reflective of where there's a lot of burden. Yeah, and our posts are geared to community managers and, water utility folks. So that's kind of the audience there. But yeah, and then this is how you could contact us, and contact me specifically if you have any further questions later on. But Kristen, I want to pass to you now, and we can talk some more about the questions if we have any other questions.
Yeah, so there was one question in the chat asking about how current debt payments go into the ratio that you shared with us about the ratio for the cost recovery.
The operating ratio, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, debt service payments should be one of the expenses that's considered, right? So the revenue is kind of more simple. It's what your customers are paying. And then everything else, all the other expenses, including the debts, should be part of the expenses part of it. And I don't want to oversimplify as well. Revenue is really the bills that your customers are paying, but you do have a couple little extra revenue streams as well, like the one-time sort of connection fee at the beginning when there's a new house, etc. Or God forbid somebody gets disconnected and then they reconnect, there's a reconnection fee involved. So yeah, but the debt service should be part of expenses.
All right, thank you. Other council members that have questions for Stacy?
I'm gonna try to bring up the UGA dashboard while
Perfect.
folks
That's great.
work on their questions. And we do have some sort of commonly asked questions. I see Bill has his hand up though.
Bill, was that from before, or do you have another question?
No, I have was from before. I'm sorry. I probably
It's okay.
clicked
That's
on the
okay.
wrong thing.
That's okay.
I thought I was going to type a question in and I didn't. I thought it was like a chat, but I couldn't find where to type it in.
That's okay. No problem.
That's good. Let me see. Liz, did you have a couple questions that we usually get when we talk about this kind of stuff? I know one of them
Yeah,
is
definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how does asset management relate to rate setting?
It's a good question. That's an important one. So asset management is a best practice at any water utility, any, utility, right? You got assets to manage. Some of them are more expensive than others. Some of them are more critical than others. Like you can afford to have a certain, not an engineer, but like a certain valve. If that breaks, it might be okay, but this other valve over here or this other piece of equipment, it may not be okay. So some you have to have sitting in the shop, just wait because they're so critical if they happen to break. And some you can wait on, and you have to have a regular maintenance plan and all of that to replace things, hopefully before some of them break, because the consequences can be so dire. So asset management relates to all of that. And a lot of these funders want to see your asset management and your capital improvement plans before they give you a loan or a grant. So in terms of how it fits into the rate setting practice, I think that's what you were asking, Liz. A good asset management plan will tell you when you need to replace things, and you should build that cost into the cost of service that we were saying. Rates should recover the cost of service, right? It shouldn't be a lot of times. So when I say, looking at this over the years, it seems like at least 1/3 of Georgia utilities have an operating ratio below 1, which means they are spending more money than they're bringing in. They must be using like general tax revenue or something to prop up the water utility. And that's not best practice. It's not sustainable. And sometimes it's the opposite, where the water utility is the cash cow and it pays for parks and benches, and and that's in the long term not going to be sustainable either, because maybe you're not doing or practicing proper asset management, and you're not replacing things before they break, or putting aside money for big expenses that are going to come up.
Stacy, there's a question in the chat. Are you available, or perhaps someone from the dashboard at UGA available to do community forums for citizens?
Yeah, we so I work pretty closely with the UGA team that has done the water and sewer dashboard, and so that's something we can figure out if there's a project where that would fit in, or if there's a a way to work that around. We certainly would be interested in that. It's a pet project of Liz and I to talk to citizens, especially about some of this stuff. We've done it on the energy side, and it's eye-opening. It's really fulfilling work because people are paying bills and they have no idea about base charge versus volumetric, and that they had a choice of, not on the water side, on the energy side, sometimes you have a choice of 8 rate structures as a customer, as a residential customer, and it's hard to navigate all of that, right? You choose one of them if you have an electric vehicle, and another one will be the worst thing if you have an electric vehicle. So anyway, yeah, we are certainly open to that kind of assistance. That's always good work. It's always eye-opening.
Good. And if somebody has an interest in that, if you reach out to me, I can get you in touch with Stacy, or you had her contact information. Oh, Stacy, I see you have the dashboard there. I had one question for you about,
Sure.
we started talking about conservation rate structures at the beginning, and you pointed out the myth. Do you have anything you would recommend to council members as they're looking at their management practices in the next plan update that might help them to add a new level of sophistication to that recommendation in their plans?
About the uniform versus increasing block?
Or how to recommend conservation rate structures? Yeah, what specifics might they recommend to make that more helpful to local communities to understand how to implement?
Okay, hopefully I understand your question, Kristen, but let me know if not. So you want if you're doing increasing block rates, which are good, and they have a lot of pros, right, for that type of rate structure. Then you want the differential between blocks 1 and 2 to be significant, right? And you don't want it to be 5 cents is the example I always use, because then that might be, following the letter of the policy for your water council and not the spirit of it. The idea of an increasing block rate structure encouraging conservation is that there's a significant difference when you get to the higher blocks, which discourages users from using more water. And so it encourages them to sort of, not do some of the discretionary stuff. Maybe they don't wash their cars as often because getting up to those higher blocks, they see a difference in their bill. Now, it's a whole question. Water rates are low compared to energy, for instance. I mean, do people even notice? Do people even notice that there was a difference if they get from one block to the next, right? But that's kind of another conversation, although it's something that you should definitely cover when you talk to a citizens group, right, on conservation. So I'd say the main thing is education and letting people know that the increasing block rate exists and that there's a significant difference, and making it so that there really is a significant difference would probably, like, psychologically encourage them to use less water. And unfortunately, psychology has a part in all of this, and I'm not trained in that area, but it's really the way humans behave, right? After there's a drought and you tell people, stop watering your lawns. There have been some studies that show even when the utility says, okay, we're great, we're good now, you don't have to stop watering your lawns, you don't have to do the alternate, they just realized that their lawns did not die when they watered every other day instead of every day. And so their behavior changes, right? But yeah, I would say that significance between the blocks is the most crucial thing. And then outreach, letting people know that this is how they can keep their bill lower, right? We're seeing right now, even as a nation, affordability is a hot topic. It's central focus on, the New York elections, right? Cost of living and affordability has been playing an important part. So if you just tell your customers that there is a conservation increasing block rate structure, and if they want to help with lower their bills, this is one way they can address that. I think in today's situation, it would go a long way.
Thanks, Stacy. So we just have a few minutes left. Do you want to tell us about the dashboard, and then I'll share information on the next webinar?
Yeah, sure. And so this is, and I'm sure I'm not keeping up with the chat, but Elizabeth was supposed to put this in. So it's georgiawaterrates.org. And it is funded by the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority. And this work has been funded by GFA since 2007, when we did the first rate survey with my former employer. So they've been very faithful to fund this, and they're very open to like ways to improve it. So I want to encourage you guys to give them feedback, right? So UGA started take over the dashboard let's see, another question that we get sometimes if people are trying to put this together in their head is this is the UNC Environmental Finance Center, and we can drop this link in the chat. This is what the old one looked like. So what we're talking about here is the thing that looked like this, okay? And now it's done by a different group and has a different look. It's a completely different software, so it behaves pretty differently. All right, so this is where I think we were. There are kind of what looks like 3 different dashboards, right? So this is the link to you can pull up individual ones. I'll just show you how some of this works here. So here are our water planning regions again. 5,000 gallons is what is going to be doing all of these calculations based on. But again, let's say I'm in Forsyth and I think my people like to water their lawns. So 7,000 gallons is more relevant for my community, then I can slide this little thing. Or if I'm saying we're more like 4,000 gallons, we have small housing stock that are pretty efficient, or we've done a good job of making people change out their high flow fixtures to low flow. So 4,000 is where we're at. You can slide this, right? All the way up to 15,000 gallons, which for a residential customer, that's kind of high. We probably don't need this dial to go, or this slider to go more than that. But what you do here is you select your utility. I'll pick on Americas. And as you select your utility, all of this stuff is changing, right? There's a lot of calculations happening in the background. This is water only for Americas, but let's do sewer. You see the dials change, and we can do water and sewer combined. And then the dials change again. So there's all kinds of stuff here. Median affordability is an interesting one. And in this case, it's median. It's that 50th percentile. It's not the 20th percentile, right? Which is an important way to measure. So it's comparing, there are 531 utilities in here. It seems you can see a lot of different information here, but I'm going to go back to this one. You'll see how this one works. So again, you're picking a utility. Some utilities don't offer, they only offer water or sewer services. So, you can play around with that. And then there's this third one. So you can look at the utility sort of specifically compared to others in the state. One of the improvements with this version of the dashboard is that you can also pull out a group of utilities that you want to compare yourselves to, right? Before it was like download a spreadsheet and delete out the other utilities rows in the table and compare it to your group. One of the goals of this one, based on focus groups and feedback, was to be able to select a subgroup of utilities and do your comparison on there. So what I think is really important, so there are also these reports that you can, open up. But I think if this is really new to you and looking very different than what you're used to or what your folks are used to, this dashboard help here is pretty useful. And there's also an opportunity to submit to UGA when your rates have changed, right? And if they got something wrong, there's a way to do that. But there are these explanations, if you will, of different terms that are used, different dials. So that's pretty important. And then, so there's a glossary as well with some of the terms. This is based on a software called Click. And so you can learn more about Click here, but then probably most important, there are these webinars, or pieces of a webinar on how to use the dashboard. So I want to encourage you to go there. But Kristen, I'm seeing we're at the top of the hour. So
Yep. Okay, good. Well, thanks. I'm just going to share a quick screen to remind people about the next webinar. And thank you very much, Stacy, for a very informative presentation. If you want to get back in touch with Stacy, her information is in the chat, or you can reach out to any of your council leads to help you to get back in touch with IB Environmental. The next webinar will be in December. Sorry, the date's not on there, December 12th. That's going to be Challenges and Opportunities with Septic Management in Georgia. Dr. Krista Capps from UGA. There is a link to the registration there. You also received an email with that link this morning from the Water Center. Thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in December.
Thank you.
all right, this was fun. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Do we need to manually
End the
stop
meeting.
the
Maybe.
recording? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Okay. Oh,
I tried to stop it, but it's not. So I guess we
it's
just
not.
need to
Okay, we
end the
just
meeting.
leave. Okay.
Okay. I'll give you a call, Sarah.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Nikki.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.